What up, guys? Back out messing with the Sport front wheel drive finishing lines Integra. We've been buttoning up some of the little final parts of the turbo kit that we've got the tabs and bungs welded in, and then we've got the charge pipe done. Turned out really good. Looks way better than the old setup that was on it. We bought a swirl pot from Track Tough online, and then we picked up a coolant overflow. So I've got to make some brackets and mount this, and I think he's wanting to mount it back up here on the firewall. So I have to make some brackets to get it tucked back up in there. That way it's kind of behind the tire, not in front of it if for some reason it had an issue. And see if we can get it fabbed up and get it mounted up there on the firewall for him. I think it looks great. I think it came out really good, and hopefully he likes it, and hopefully he enjoys seeing it on the car this way. Cleaned up a lot of the turbo kit, mainly just doing away with the pipe that was coming off the turbo and went to the intercooler before. So anyways, I'm gonna get some tabs made, see if we can get this mounted, and we'll just keep chipping away. We're out in the shop and we're still tinkering away on the Durango. So weird looking LS motor in there. So like I said in the previous video, we are planning on putting LS coils on this. I've just kind of got them set on the valve cover just to kind of get an idea how things are going to set and look. We'll be able to use stock LS plug wires. They fit into the factory like steel heat shield there on the head, which is cool. We'll have to make some brackets to mount these to or above the valve cover, and then we'll have to figure out a way to get to the fill cap on the valve cover as well. So we got some things to sort out there. I went through and kind of got some of this vacuumed up. We're going to end up pulling a bunch of this out, which I'm going to do here in just a moment to try and get some of this stuff cleaned up. There's some wiring and stuff I've got to get inside the truck to pull out, and then we're going to start sorting out the wiring harness and stuff. But I did get the intake manifold back from a buddy of mine, put it in the ultrasonic, got it ultrasonicked up. One thing I need to do is the coolant temp sensor for the Chrysler is very small. This is it here. This is the coolant temp sensor. Terminator harness is meant for or uses the same style as like an LS coolant temp sensor. So I think what I'm going to do is the intake manifold has this flat spot right here next to the thermostat, not far away from that one. I think I'm going to drill this and tap this, and I think I'm going to use an LS style coolant temp sensor. As long as, which we can check, make sure we've got room. As long as I've got room. Oh yeah, that's weird. This intake actually has a sensor there. Huh. So that one has a sensor there and a sensor here. See if I can move this hose. Yeah, see there's a coolant temp sensor there. And then there's one over there as well. Interesting. I wonder what that's about. I ordered some pieces from Utah Performance. I think they're out of Utah. If I was a betting man, I'd say they were out of Utah. I bought some pieces from them to modify the Kager intake to get rid of all the volume this plenum has. They call them VRP, and it's like a metal or aluminum plate that fills in all this area around these runners here and here. And the VRP stands for volume reducing plates. And they say those plates will like add like 30 or 40 foot-pounds of torque just by reducing the volume, because these intake manifold has too much volume for the cylinder head, so then it slows down airspeed going in the backside of the valve, in turn it loses torque. And then another piece is a heat shield that bolts down on the top of the engine here where the spider setup is, and it's just a big pan, and it actually keeps the oil from deflecting and getting tossed onto the back of the bottom of the intake manifold. And they said that'll drop intake air temps like 40 degrees. We got the intake kind of set down on the truck, mocked up, got it painted black. We got the little carb hat thing, that thing there, we got it painted up black. I did decide I'm going to probably try and get some new valve covers for this thing off Amazon, mainly because the LS coils, when you set the coils down on top of here, it actually covers up the oil cap. So my thought is you can buy like a $90 pair of aluminum valve covers, and the aluminum valve covers, the way they're made, they actually come all the way out to this pan or up to this valve cover rail. So then there's actually recessed holes in the cover. So it gives me a lot more surface area up top here, because when I set the coils on top, they pretty much set just above this. But I think if I have this much space off to the side of these new valve covers, I can just put a cap out here, assuming nothing gets in the way. I went ahead and got the battery tray and stuff out. Like I said, we still got some wiring to pull out of here, but I want to get all these leaves and mouse turds and everything sucked out of here. I thought it might be a good idea just to go ahead and pull the motor completely out of this thing. I've got to pull the headers off anyways to modify the old breather setup that they had in here. I mean, heck, at this point, I'm motor mounts, a radiator hose, unbolt the power steering pump, and bell housing bolts, and I could pull the motor out of it. And it would be nice to see the inside of this engine, maybe even paint it up so it's all black, and it would look a lot nicer, like fresh paint and stuff in there. I don't know. I'm not sure just yet. I've got the ECU here, and we're going to attempt to find a spot to put this. I got everything cleaned up, got all my leaves and stuff sucked out of there. And I think I'm going to put the ECU over here. It's going to tuck in there pretty nice. It's going to make it easier for me to run the wiring, and I can run the wiring with what factory harness is still going to be in the truck, which will be nice. It'll kind of tuck everything off to one side, and it'll be kind of in behind the battery, so it's not going to be standing out like a sore thumb. Also, like the map sensor hose and everything's going to be easier to run. The trans lines are going to be easier to run. I'm not going to have to try and run a bunch of stuff through the firewall of the truck. All right, so we got our trans harness plugged in here. We'll have to mount this relay. There's a fuse on the trans harness as well. I think this relay here is going to end up going down here. Probably I'll end up putting like a riv nut or something because this wiring is going to tuck down in there a little bit further than what I've got it. We are going to try and make as many as the gauges on the dash work as we can. Obviously the gas gauge is going to work because all that stuff's staying the same. Oil pressure sensor, and then also the coolant temp sensor. We'll add a second temp sensor for that, or leave the sensor for that, add a second sensor for the Terminator, so the Terminator will have its own coolant temp stuff, and then that way we can data log all that. And then like I said, we'll probably have to piggyback or make like a splitter for the VSS. And then there are a couple other sensors on the trans that I'm uncertain of what they are. We're going to try and thin out this harness and make it to where all the factory stuff that plugs in the factory PCM, all that stuff will still function like it's supposed to. And like AC, I believe all the AC stuff and everything still works. We still have a long ways to go. We've still got to get the intake sorted out and fuel injectors, getting the coils done and all that stuff. So we still have a long ways to go, but so we kind of got the harness strung out here. Overall, everything looks like it's going to lay out really nice. Obviously, I've got a bunch of cleanup to do over here with some wiring and vacuum hoses and all that stuff. The factory harness comes up this side of the engine and kind of comes over here. The factory ECU mounts on this side, so we'll remount the factory ECU over here like normal. And like I'd said when I was painting the intake, I'm going to put a factory LS coolant temp sensor right here, so that'll go there. We're not going to use the factory map sensor. We're going to use the map sensor that's built into the Holley. That's our coolant temp TPS. That's what we're going to have to make a jumper harness and try and make something that'll connect from here into this TPS. We should be able to get a male connector for this, and then a female connector hopefully for this side, and then we'll make a little jumper harness to go in the TPS. The IAC uses the same connector. Should be good. But yeah, all this will tuck around real nice. Obviously your fuel pump wires and all that stuff. Anyways, yeah, we're just gonna lay that out. That's kind of a rough idea, kind of where everything's gonna go. Still got a little bit more cleaning to do, but we're figuring some stuff out. That's all what it's all about. Any progress is good progress. All right, so we're sitting out here in the shop digging into the wiring harness, and we're going to start dissecting this thing. I've kind of already started pulling loom off, but we're basically going to dissect this and make this where there's no engine control stuff on here, and it's just whatever couple sensors that are plugged into the transfer case that aren't on the Holley harness, and then like all the AC connectors. But once I get all that stuff pulled out of this, we'll go through and try and reloom everything and try and make it look good, and then actually kind of try and make it blend in with the Holley harness as well. So we've got everything thinned out. There's not many wires left. in this harness. But we'll go through, we'll tape everything up, get all the wires cleaned up. Obviously, I've still got some loom I got to clean off here. We'll put some better looking loom on some of these ones that I didn't have to touch. But yeah, we'll go through and we'll tidy everything up and loom it all up. Should be good as far as that goes for the chassis harness side of things. I'll go through and get this cleaned up and get it loomed up real quick, and we'll show you that as soon as we get it all knocked out. All right, so we got the factory harness thinned out. We've got it all loomed up. I did make a couple changes. I made one change. Anyways, let me show you what it looks like. All right, so here's the harness. As you can see, it looks pretty thin. I did take a ton of wires out of here, mainly off the white connector. There's actually only 4 wires going into this connector now. And then there's probably a dozen still going in this, maybe a little less than a dozen. Tried to keep the shape of the factory harness as much as we could. Obviously, there would have been injectors, connectors on both sides of this. This would be the back of the engine. This here is the oil sending unit connector. I left this in the harness mainly because I want the dash gauges to work still. So we left that in. We'll have to put a T on the back of the block. That way we can have the factory sensor and like a pressure transducer on the back of it that will monitor oil pressure for the Holley, and then that'll get logged. But it'll be nice to be able to see this on the dash. And then here we have coolant temp sensor. And then this here, I cut the 2 wires off, mainly because like when you're going to disconnect this, it's got 2 ring terminals on the back of the alternator. So these are gonna get hooked back up on the alternator, and then I'll put the other side of this Deutsch connector here. So that way, if I ever have to disconnect the alternator, all I've gotta do is just disconnect the Deutsch, and I don't have to get a wrench out to undo these eyelets or nothing like that. So then I'll just be able to Deutsch. But those will go kind of like this, they're at the back of the alternator. And then this goes into the fuse box. So this will essentially come out like this. This also goes in the fuse box, and then battery on driver's side. The transmission side of it, we took the O2 sensor connectors and wiring out of this, and then the main trans connector and the VSS is now a part of the Holley harness, and these connectors go onto the transmission and connect to sensors I'm unaware of. So that's why I left those in there, because I don't know what they go to. I know they go on the transmission and the transfer case, but I don't know what sensors they are. So we just left those in there. Everything looks pretty good. Turned out really well for probably 5 hours worth of work, thinning all that out. And then this is what we removed out of the harness. All these extra connectors. This is one I actually got to keep. It's TPS because we've got to make a conversion harness or an adapter harness. Honestly, I'll probably keep all these connectors. If I ever need spare connectors, then I'll have it. So now we're at a point where we can throw this part of the harness back in. I've still got a piece coming for the intake manifold. We got to get it modified and put back on. But we'll get into that whenever the parts and stuff get here. We'll lay this out and back in the engine bay, get the ECU and stuff mounted back. And then hopefully everything will still function as factory should be. So making a little progress on the Durango here. We've got a bunch of like the Pro Charger fuel system stuff. I've actually still got to take out of the truck. It's still got an auxiliary fuel pump on the frame rail and some hoses and wiring and stuff in there. It's got looks like an equalizer inside the glove box that's a part of the Pro Charger fuel system. We'll get into that whenever we rip all that stuff out. But we're making headway. I cannot wait to drive this thing. I'm so stoked. Hopefully this excites you all as much as it does me. I love doing something different. I really want to try and bring the Magnum stuff back to life. We've got one sitting back there on a stand. That's possibly for the green bean, but for now it's just going to sit there and just kind of marinate in the shop. That's going to do it for today's video, guys. Appreciate everybody watching. Don't forget, comment, like, subscribe. Don't forget, also check out the merch store, mremotorsports.com. There's a link in the description. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see y'all on the next one. Appreciate it.